Listen, when I met Nate, I had heard that he was funny, but he totally delivered on that reputation. I knew that he was well liked. I could tell that he was had a ton of charisma, just a solid guy. And literally the first time I met him, I remember sitting across the restaurant table and we just laughed like crazy. I'd never even met the guy, but in like 2 minutes, I felt like we'd been best friends forever. And he's kind of one of those guys. He's got so much charisma, so much people skill. When Nate walks into a room, it could be 100 people in the room, it could be 1,000. But in 5 minutes, he's like everybody's best friend. You know, he's just the best. When I get to hang out with this guy, he lives in Indiana, I live out here, but we get to hang out a couple times a year. And literally before I even get to say anything to him, I start laughing because I know it's only a matter of time until I'm laughing hard enough. I'm like crying and my stomach hurts. You know what I'm saying? He's just the best. And what I didn't realize at the beginning with him is that he's a passionate dude too. He's not just quirky and funny and relatable. He's passionate. Like he is driving hard after things that he believes really matter. And not only is he able to win people over, but he is able to call the best out of people and help them be so encouraged and so rightly positioned to just do awesome things with their life. Nate is just the best. Do you have friends like this? Where if you were to start describing them to me, you would just say, man, they're the best, right? I was getting my hair cut once, and my wife and I got our hair cut by the same girl, and her cousin was moving to town, and she looked at us, and she's like, listen, I've cut you guys' hair long enough. I know that you guys would just totally love Jason and Nicole. They're moving to town. You guys should totally hang out. So we did. We hung out. We kind of braved the awkward of that first introduction, and it wasn't like 5 minutes in, and we realized that Jason and Nicole, they're the real deal. Like Jason is quirky and goofy, their relationship is funny, he's totally up for cliff diving in the dark or sliding down the side of a mountain on skis with no coat on or shirt or anything, and he was just up for crazy. But in the very next breath, he would ask the most insightful question that didn't feel invasive or uncomfortable. It was just like, man, this guy can just get right to it. And then he would listen in such a way that he would just help you think really well. And Nicole's the same way, and she's the best. She would just listen, and she didn't just listen to you, but she has this cool thing where she kind of listens to God on your behalf, and she says things that just get right to the core of the issue. And our friendship with them is so good. Do you have friends like this? In fact, when we moved out here, as we were deciding to leave Illinois and come out and hang out in the desert in this awesome city, they were some of the people that kind of prayed and helped us clarify, is this really the best choice for our family? Jason and Nicole are just the best. You have friends like this? All right, for the last few weeks, we've been doing this series about developing a friendship with Jesus. Not just that he's God, but he also calls us to be his friend. And while friendship with Jesus is a little different than every other friendship, it comes about in the same way every other friendship comes about. If you think about how you became friends with anybody you became friends with, you started talking to them, you listened to what they had to say, you did stuff with them, so you started building some stories. Remember, relationships are just a big pile of stories together. You got to know them. You know, maybe you Facebook stalked them or creeped on their Instagram or just asked people around them. I don't know where you land on that whole thing. And we've been talking about that with Jesus. Like with speaking and listening, we call that prayer. And with doing stuff with him, we call it being on mission with him. Last week, we talked about looking in the scriptures to get to know Jesus. But in every single friendship, if you're going to stay friends with someone, you come to a point where you kind of look at them and you're able to just say, you're the best. You just love things about them, right? They're just great. You appreciate different things about your friends. Now, I get that my language of you're the best may not like resonate with all of you. My 5-year-old really brought that into our family. I don't know how he watched Jimmy Fallon, but apparently he did. And he just robbed that straight from Jimmy Fallon. He looks at us one day and goes, guys, you're the best. And we're like, boom, that's our family's language right now. But maybe for you, I just thought maybe we could trace back through generations and maybe you can find yourself, because maybe your friends aren't the best. Maybe your friends are just awesome. These are awesome friends. It's your word is awesome. Some of you have friends that are sweet. Some of you have friends that are like fat with a PH. You know what I'm saying? That's you. I don't know. Maybe just a few of you. Some of you have fly friends or gnarly friends. Some of you, let's be honest, you have groovy friends, don't you? Your friends are groovy. That's the kind of friends you have. Your friends are cool. Some of you guys are like, cool is not an old word. Well, apparently it started in the 40s. So those of you still using cool, you're like vintage and you didn't even know it. So good on you. Right? Or maybe if we reach way back, for those of you who are way wiser than all of us, your friends are the bee's knees or the cat's pajamas. I don't really know. Whatever your word is, my word is the best. You know that sense where you just look at them and there's this thing that happens and you realize what you love about them. You're like, oh man, you're the best. That happens in every friendship. Because in our friendships, whether it's with Jesus or anybody else, we deeply appreciate our friends because of who they are. Think about some of your best friends. Think about what you love about them, and this sense of just deep appreciation starts to well up in us because of who they are. Now, with Jesus, this same thing happens. There are things that we deeply appreciate about him because of who he is. It's a little bit different with him. In fact, there's a different word that we use for this part of our friendship with Jesus. It's called worship. Now, don't disconnect all that we've said so far. There are things where when we look at our friends and we're just like, that is awesome, that's cool, you're the best, right? But with Jesus, we call it worship. And I want to invite you into this tension that I've kind of been feeling this whole series. This tension of how do we help? It's a high priority for us here at Canyon Ridge to make things relatable, like that what God has said matters today, and that like it still matters on Tuesday afternoon and Thursday morning and when you're on your drive to work, and it matters everywhere. And we want to make it super relatable and understandable in terms that make sense to all of us, whether you're here for the first time or you've been around church forever. The risk I've been feeling in this series is this, that we might, in talking about friendship with Jesus, we run the risk, even though Jesus called people his friends, we run this risk of making Jesus sound like our pal, or just this guy who's just like a little bit better than every other guy we've ever met, that he's just like the best person that's ever lived. And the truth is that Jesus is nothing like that. The scripture says there is no one like him. In fact, as we take this to friendship with God to a whole nother level, there's this idea of reverence for him that is deserved by him that's not deserved to anybody else. And so I want to live in this tension, and you're going to be tempted to like choose one or the other, but the beauty is we get both, okay? On one side is God's hugeness, his awesomeness, this idea that in the scriptures he could hold all the universes in the palm of his hand. That as awesome as artists are, as amazing as some of you who are artists and others that we've seen in music, movie, all this other stuff, what they've done is they've taken created things and rearranged them in a really creative way that draws our attention and makes us say, wow. But God's on a whole nother level, because God didn't take stuff and make something cool. God took nothing and spoke, and it became something. In fact, it became every something you've ever seen, smelled, tasted, touched, heard, anything. Right? He's huge. There's no limit to him. He's all-knowing. He's all-powerful. He's all-present. He is all of those things. There's no way we could wrap our heads around him. If we could, that would probably make us God instead of him God. He's enormous. He's just all-powerful. In the scripture, it talks about he lives in unapproachable light. In fact, if you look across the scriptures, what you find is that even when God's messengers, not even God himself, but when God's messengers show up to talk to people, you know what happens to like everybody? They hit smack face down on the ground and hope they don't die. They realize in that moment that something way bigger and way more powerful exists than them, and they're like, boom, I'm down. In fact, that's what the word worship in the scripture means, is to bow down, to lower yourself. And so they do. Are you catching this bigness? We never want to lose sight of this. Even though God invites us to friendship, he is not our pal or our buddy. He's God. Everybody cool so far? But do you remember what the very next thing almost every single one of those messengers said? As soon as they show up, these humans hit the ground. Do you remember what they said next? Be not afraid. Because this huge and awesome and limitlessly powerful God invites us to be as close as possible to him. That Jesus calls people his friend, that he walked among them. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, it says that we can approach God because of Jesus, because he's paid for everything that we would ever be ashamed of, that we can approach God with boldness and confidence in our time of need. Are you catching this? It doesn't have to be he's either all powerful and I'm nothing and I don't matter, or it has to be, okay, I'm his buddy and he's not really that big a deal. No, it's both. He is such a big deal. And he invites us so close. Can we live in that tension just a little bit today? It's both, and it's more beautiful when it's both. That he's huge and he invites us to real friendship with him.
Now, what we're going to do is that we love things about our friends. We really deeply appreciate who they are is what makes us really love them. But who they are comes out in what they do. And so we're going to talk about things that Jesus has done that point to who he is. And the first one is this, and we're actually going to practice all of these. We're not just going to listen, we're going to do, because Jesus said that was a big deal. The first one is this, is that we can say that Jesus is the best. Jesus is the best because of what he has done. Because of what Jesus has done, he's the best. In fact, I'm going to show you two different scriptures here that you can use later this week, that if you want to spend some time telling Jesus how awesome he is, these are two scriptures you could use. In fact, they're both by this guy named Paul. He was just writing a letter to a bunch of people who were following him. It's just this ancient letter that we're going to read that he wrote to some guys, some people following Jesus. And it's kind of like he just backs up and he's been thinking about Jesus just long enough that he's got to just talk about how awesome he is. He's just got to take a breath and say how awesome he is. There's two of them. The first one here is in Philippians chapter 2. It says this, and I want you to watch for that tension we talked about, how big God is and how near he is. Y'all ready? Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 says this, that though he was God, not he was with God, not he was around God, not he was kind of like God, he was God. He did not think of equality with God as something to cling to or grasp or manipulate or take advantage of. Instead, catch this, big, huge, larger than all the universe, spoke everything into existence. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges, or he emptied himself. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. And then when he appeared as a human being, he humbled himself and became in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. You catching this? Huge, eternal God humbled himself all the way to the most humiliating death a human could die. But then catch what God does because of that. Therefore, God elevated him to the highest place of honor, and he gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Christ is the Lord, to the glory of the Father. Are you catching this? Huge God, eternal, no beginning, no end, no one made him. He's always existed, spoke everything into existence, and he enters his creation. And then while in his creation, he lowers himself to the lowest form and dies on behalf of all of us, a death that we earned for ourselves, but he never deserved. And then God elevates him again. I love this. On each end, this hugeness and awesomeness of him, and right in the middle, the demonstration of God's character, that he lowered himself. God is awesome, and Jesus is the best because of what he's done. He showed up. When we didn't know what he was like, he shows up. The question is why? Because some of you are hanging out for the first time. You just love the people that you came with, and you're like, okay, guy died. What's the big deal? Check this out in Colossians chapter 1. Not only did Jesus show up, but in Colossians chapter 1, in verse 20, it says this, and through him, meaning Jesus, through Jesus, God reconciled. Reconcile just means bring back together. Two things that were separate, people who are arguing, distant, fighting, no peace. He brings them back together. God reconciled everything to himself. He made peace. Anybody need some peace? He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. And this includes you, who were once far away from God. You were his enemies, separated from him by your evil thoughts, by our evil thoughts and actions. Yet now he has reconciled. He's brought back all of us to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. And as a result, catch this, he brought you into his own presence. Huge, enormous, eternal, no beginning, no end, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-present, all-powerful God brings us into his presence, and you are holy, and you are blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. You see, the beauty of what Jesus did is that he paid all the price we would ever need to pay. Anything we've ever done to be ashamed or offended with God, that he had paid for all of that so that this distance between tiny little us and huge immeasurable God could be closed and we could be right in his presence, holy and blameless. And if that alone doesn't make us say, Jesus, you're the best, I don't know what to say. No one has ever loved us like that. No one has ever done that for us. That this Jesus, who did not need to step aside from everything else, stepped aside and stepped into our mess and owned our mess for us so that it could not separate us from God. And he has this habit of taking dead things and calling them to life. For some of you who are hanging for the first time, that sounds a little bit weird, but for those of us who've been following him for a while, we totally get it, don't we? Because there are marriages in the room that were totally falling apart, that are being daily restored. There are addicts in the room who are winning day after day after day, collecting chip after chip after chip, because God is giving them the strength to get through. There were families like distance from one another, that they humbled themselves, forgave one another, are coming back together. There are peoples whose identities were just wrecked by abuse of all different kinds, who are figuring out that what others have said about them is not who they are, but instead what Jesus says is who they are. That people's vocations and their purpose are being called to life all the time. Things that were dead or even half alive, limping along, have been called to a brand new kind of life in Jesus. Can I get just a little head nod from anybody who knows this? I'm just saying. He takes dead things and he makes them alive. You see, Jesus is the best because of what he's done. He's rescued us. He is rescuing us. He is taking all the dead parts and calling them to life. It's happening in our lives. It's happening in the lives of people around us. And so it's like the best response that we can do to just say, Jesus, you're the best. And so our church has this habit of practicing this every single week, that we take a particular time to celebrate and remember what Jesus has done, because it's the hinge pin. Without this resurrection of Jesus, without his death, burial, and resurrection to a new kind of life, we don't have a new kind of life. And so we practice this every single week with this thing we call communion. In fact, there's some volunteers who are going to go move right now, and they're going to stand up and go pass this stuff out so we don't all have to move and go get stuff. But here's what's going to happen. We do this every week, but if you're new, here's the drill. These trays are going to pass by you, and there's going to be 2 cups together, and one of them is going to be a little piece of bread and a cup of juice. And please, 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 don't allow the size of these to reflect their importance. Hold on to what we said earlier of huge, limitless, immeasurable, universe-creating God puts on flesh, and this little piece of bread represents the body of Jesus. So as you take this cup, reflect on how big of a deal it is that God loved you enough to show up, and that somehow in his death, burial, and resurrection, he brings us in to his presence. And this little cup of juice to reflect the blood that ran out of him, that he gave every ounce of his life for us. And we celebrate and remember, and we say with this that Jesus is the best because of what he's done. And then maybe take just a few minutes as the trays pass and not only think about the bigness and the humility that Jesus demonstrated, but also the stories of life change that you're experiencing, the dead things in your life that have been brought to life. Rehearse those, run them over and over in your mind, of the things that God is putting back together in you and in the lives of people around you, in your life group, in your family, in your friends. And just say, Jesus, I can't believe you've done this. You're the best. Maybe even offer him the things you're asking for him yet to do. But let's just spend a little bit of time together saying, Jesus, you're the best. Let's take communion. Listen, we did one of these already, and we've hinted at the second. We said Jesus is the best because of what he's done, but that's not all, right? That you've seen this already, that Jesus is not just the best because of what he's done, he's the best because of what he's made, right? Maybe as you soaked up those videos of Yosemite Valley, maybe you've been there, maybe you haven't. About a year ago, I went for 24 hours for the first time, and literally, for the whole 12-mile hike, I was pretty sure in every single second that where I was looking, that second was the best thing I've ever seen in my life. It just takes your breath away that God could speak that into one tiny little corner of California, on one side of a continent, one tiny little part of one planet that he spoke into existence. It just blows us away. Maybe you haven't been to Yosemite, but maybe you've stood on the beach as the sun just sinks into the ocean. The clouds change all different kinds of hues and colors. Maybe over the mountains here in Las Vegas, or maybe you just looked into the beauty of the color in your child's eyes, and you've just said, wow. Too often we stop and marvel at the creation, and we fail to let it drive us to the Creator, right? That I'm a huge fan of mountains. Maybe it's because I grew up in Illinois. I love mountains. They are nothing compared to the mountain maker. And so we have this opportunity always for all of God's creation to point us to him. Now, I don't know what you believe about how all of this got here. Whether you're evolution or creationism, whether you're 6 24-hour periods of time or your 6 periods of time of some length or whatever, I don't know, but I'll tell you where I land. God did it. That's where I'm at. All over the scriptures, I know what the scripture says, and I know that he did it. In fact, over and over in the scriptures, it says that the heavens declare how great he is, that the rivers sing about him. In places that no man has ever set foot, there is beauty and it exists for him. It all points to him, that the trees clap their hands. And if you've ever walked around on Mount Charleston among the aspens after the leaves have started to turn this blazing bright yellow, you know exactly what that sounds like. Right? That we get to soak all of this up. In fact, in Romans chapter 1, it says that God's invisible qualities are visible because of the way the creation is ordered and how complicated and how perfect it operates. It's so good. All of it points to him. And so maybe as you soak up any part of God's creation, anything that you see, smell, taste, touch, all these things that we love to study and understand, and we're so grateful for science and all that stuff to like help us really get into it and see how awesome God really is. Maybe as you soak those things up this week, they could drive you to just pause long enough to say, God, you're the best. Let it drive you to worship him and not just settle for the beauty of that thing or that moment, but the beauty of him in a moment with him, in a great friendship. Okay, now here we're going to do something weird. Are you ready? A little bit awkward. Get ready. Here's what I'd like for you to do. Those of you who are like feverish note takers, it's going to be okay. I won't say anything important for a while. Just put your pen down. Put 2 hands out like this. You can put them on your lap. You don't need to like try to get a signal or anything. Just like here, okay? It's right here. And I want you to hold everything we've said so far in this hand right here. Okay, so pick a hand. I don't care. It doesn't matter. In this hand right here, everything we've said so far, limitless power, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-present, all-powerful, never a beginning, never an end God. Right here. And like, he enters his creation. Hold that idea that he enters his creation out of crazy love for you and then dies on your behalf and on my behalf and raises to a new kind of life and invites us into that. And he's the kind of God who puts us back together piece by piece every time we say yes to him. All of that held in this hand right here. And while you're at it, just put everything you've ever seen, smelled, tasted, touched, felt, heard, anything right here. All the creation, even the parts you haven't seen and aren't even sure they're real. Put it all right here in this hand. Everybody good? And then in this hand, I want you to put everything you're worried about. I want you to put everything that you're afraid of, everything that stresses you out, everything that you're not sure how it's going to turn out, every plan you have for your life and your child's, every dream you have for your future, every single concern or worry that has yet to be that tries to consume us. Everything that you've tried feverishly to get rid of or find a solution to, you've Googled it 100 times trying to figure it out. And then I want you to just hold both hands together and just think about how those two hands compare. If you're like me, one hand's a little bit bigger than the other, yeah? Do you think that the God who is capable of speaking everything, including you, into existence and loves you so much to enter creation, not only can handle everything else in your other hand, but is deeply interested in walking with you through that in the other hand? You see, Jesus is the best because he's better than everything else. Every other solution you have tried pales in comparison to him. And this hand is more than you can possibly fathom. And in this one is just the thing that's right in front of you, and he can handle it. You see, God does not ask for our worship because he needs his ego stroked. He calls us to worship because it recalibrates us. It gives us perspective. It invites us in. When we hold all of this right here in our attention, and then we bring this to it, we find out that God is capable, and he's able, and he's loving, and he's willing, and we don't need to live in stress and fear and worry. And there is no better solution on Google, in the bookstore, from a friend. There is no better solution because he's the best. And so we bring all of it. See, Jesus is the best, not just because of what he's done, and not just because of what he's made, as if that wouldn't be enough. But on top of all of that, Jesus is the best because of what he's willing and able to do with all of this. No one dreams bigger for you than he does. No one has better plans for you than he does. No one has more power to accomplish those things than he does. No one has ever given more to you than he has. No one is more interested in you than he is. No one loves you more than he has. No one will ever sacrifice more for you than he already has. No one will be with you closer or longer than he will. Because of what he's willing and able to do, he's the best. He's the best. All those solutions that you're trying pale in comparison to him. I'm not saying that these things aren't real. I'm not saying that they don't look like a mountain in front of you. I'm just saying that the mountain maker will go with you. And he'll carry you through. That he'll lend all of his strength. And even if it doesn't go away immediately, he will carry you through it. And he'll finish it in the end. Philippians chapter 1 verse 6 says this. Paul, writing to these group of people trying to follow Jesus, who figured out that Jesus is the deal, that he's awesome, he's the best, and they're living with him and trying to figure out what that looks like. They've started on a path with Jesus, and the truth is, whether you're watching online or you're hanging out in the room, just showing up, you've taken one step. And I just want you to know that Jesus will take that and honor that, and every single step that you'll take with him, he'll go with you, and he'll finish what he started. It's right here in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. It says, I'm certain, Paul says, I'm certain, I'm convinced, I'm confident that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Jesus Christ returns. That what he began in you, what he is beginning in you, what he's working in you, he will only increase and complete. That every single time we'll take this and set it next to this and say, yes, Jesus, I trust you more than anything else. You're the best. I'm bringing the best to everything I have. When you say yes, he will continue. He will work, and life will well up. It will not always get easier, but it will always, always, always get better. Because he'll go with us. There's no one like him. There's no one like him. We can bring all of that to him and trust him to finish. And as if that's not enough, as if carrying us through this life and increasing our life all the way through to the moment we pass on isn't enough, he'll do this forever. And there will come a day when Jesus, who has won every victory there is to win, he'll return, which is what Paul says. He'll carry it on until the day of completion when Christ returns. That when Jesus comes back, because he is supreme over all, because at his very name, every knee will bow and every tongue will shout out how great he is, in that moment, Jesus will make everything right. And there will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, no more depression, no more cancer, no more isolation, no more abandonment, no more abuse, no more self-doubt, no more failure. It will be all good because we're with him all the time. So even if all we do is let him carry us through this life and it's hard the whole way, there's coming a day when there will be a rest and we'll be with him forever. You see, Jesus is the best because of what he has done. And he's the best because of what he's made. And he's the best because of what he's not only willing, but entirely able to do. And so we lean in. Peter would say it this way. He would say, look, because of Jesus' glory and his excellence, he has given us great and precious promises. That he'll never leave us. He'll forgive us. He'll love us. He'll never abandon us. That he'll walk us through. That he's the God of all comfort. That he'll surround us with community. That he'll win in the end. That his Spirit's alive in us. That he'll do eternal things over and over and over. Promise on top of promise on top of promise. And here's what we do when we take this hand and we put them together. We do what Peter says when he says make every effort to respond to God's promises. Because when we bring this to this, it puts everything in perspective, and we start to be people whose lives aren't easy, but they're marked by peace and trust and confidence, because the mountain maker will come to the mountain in front of us. And so we respond, and we respond in every way we can. We responded by taking communion earlier. We responded by watching this video of Yosemite to try to remind and spur to mind all of these things that God has created, so that in those moments where we say, wow, we can just say, you're the best. And we do this for what we're willing, what we would carry to him, the things that we're stressed about, the things that we're afraid of. And so we're going to do this. We're going to practice some of this. In fact, I'm going to give you a few practices that you can go into your week, because we want this relationship to grow. Doing something once in a relationship doesn't cause a relationship to grow. Continuing in it, having a habit of it, is what causes relationships to grow. So here's a few things. I'll start with number 2. I'll get back to number 1 in a minute. Number 2, find ways this week for the creation to inspire you to tell God, you're the best. Go walk around on the mountains. Go walk in the desert, but do it soon. It's getting hot. Take water. Drive, be in your air conditioning. I don't care. Whatever it takes, stare into the beautiful colors in your child's eyes and just marvel at how good God is. Or put David Attenborough in Planet Earth on TV or something and let him drone on about something and just say, you're the best. To God. Number 3, here's this crazy talk. This is like varsity level. Be ready for this. You ready? Remember all that stuff in this hand? Let every time you are stressed or worried be signals. Let that be a trigger in you that says, right in that moment, to say, God, you're the best. And remember how generous and capable God is. Take any time something pops up in this hand and take it right to this one. And allow it, the very thing that should drive you away and take away your joy and peace, let it be the very thing that drives you to him. And cling to that same peace and confidence that God is capable of walking you through this. Doesn't mean you won't need to take action. It just means you don't have to be freaking out while you do. You can go with him. Now, we've got a bonus one. This is number 4, so if you're taking notes at home, you could write this down if you want. But we'll do number 4, then we'll go back to number 1. But I got to ask those volunteers who are going to collect stuff, would you mind doing this one more time? Sorry, up, down, I get it. I'm sorry. One of the ways we tell God he's the best is by keeping him at the very most important part of our life, the very center of our life. And there's this practice we have as followers of Jesus that we do this every week in our community here as well. that we take one of the things that has this habit of working its way into the center of who we are. It's one of the lousy solutions we try for this hand, for trust, that if we have a problem or something else, that more money is going to fix that our confidence and our fear could be taken away if our bank account was big enough. But instead, what God invites us to do is to be generous like him. And so we take the first fraction, a percentage of what we make, and we give it back to him to keep all of our hearts in the right space. To keep all of us reminded that whatever money I could put in this hand will not solve what's in that hand. It's all of this that's true, that actually brings peace and joy and confidence and healing and all the things that God can bring. And so we take a portion of our income and we give it back to God. If you're here for the first time, or you're just hanging out, or you're not sure about this Jesus thing, this is not a guilt thing. God doesn't need your money. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. If he needed help, he would not ask us. He's God. But he's invited us to do this as we engage in our relationship with him. And so we do this regularly. And there's lots of ways to give. They're in your handout if you want to follow those. But we're going to do that here in just a second as yet another way to say, Jesus, this money's not the best. You're the best. And finally, number one, we're actually going to do this one together while they pass this stuff here in a minute. Here's the number one. Give time each day to reflect on the 3 questions that were in your handout through the outline. I don't care if you use the exact same questions. They're just my best stab at trying to help you. But if we're really going to bring all of this to all of this, then we've got to spend time thinking about this. The greatness of God, and taking time and saying, you're the best. We call it worship, call it what you want, but you just take time and say, Jesus, you're the best. And so there's 3 questions, and here's what we're going to do. There's pencils in the back of the seats, or you can grab a pen. Just spend some time. You could do this anywhere, anytime. Just sit down and guard some time, just a couple of minutes, to tell God how great he is. For me, I put it on your handout because if I'm not writing something, I'll get distracted and I'll be thinking about something else and wander off. So I write stuff. I grab my Moleskine journal, my Pilot G206. I throw my headphones in with Pandora Explosions in the Sky on loop, and then I'm good to go. And just spend time writing to God about how great he is. And so there's 3 questions there. You can think through what God has done in your life or the lives of people around you, or you can just thank Jesus for what he did for us on the cross. And just spend some time writing it. Even though you've thought it before, isn't it good from those who love us to tell us what they love about us? It's just what you're doing. Or you can go to the second question, and you could think about those times where you've looked at creation, and you're just like, wow. You could draw a picture. I don't know if you're artistic, draw a picture. My kids' pictures are awesome. Just draw it. And just spend time thinking, God, this was you. You did this. What happened in me is because of how great you are. You're the best. Or you can go to the third question and just list all the things that stress you out. You just take everything out of this hand and drop it right on that piece of paper. And right next to it, Jesus, you're the best. You got this. You're not afraid. You're not stressed out. You're not freaking out. I don't wonder if you're strong. You're strong enough for this. You got this. And just allow our attention on this to bring great peace and confidence to this. So we're going to take a couple or 3 minutes. There's going to be some music playing because total silence is awkward. And you can just write. The buckets are going to pass. Just let them move on by. But don't settle for a conversation with the person next to you when you could have a conversation with the Creator. Don't settle for this or whatever is chirping for your attention, but instead take a couple or 3 minutes and just say, God, you're worthy of my attention, and I'm going to give it to you. You're the best for the next couple minutes. Let's do this together. It's good to just do stuff right away. The best time to say yes to Jesus is always like right now. And so that couple or 3 minutes, some of you, hopefully that's something that a practice you can take in to the rest of your week. Some of you sitting quietly and still is like your worst nightmare. And so maybe like walking around on the mountains or out in creation is your thing, or maybe putting some worship music on and doing whatever it is that you do just helps you focus in. But make space. Like, have you experienced today that like talking to God about how good he is just good for us? Anybody feel like some things have just kind of been reset and recalibrated just a little bit? That these things right here, there's an answer for those, and his name's Jesus. That he'll walk through all of that with us. For those of you who don't yet have a friendship with Jesus, you can have a friendship with him. He's done everything necessary, and we would love to talk to you about that. You can begin that at any point. No matter where you are or how you got yourself there, there's a way forward with him. So we invite you to that. We talk with you down front or in the back or out at the corner about any of that. But make space this week. He's worthy of it. He deserves it, and it's good for us. And our friendship with him will grow. Well, we want to finish by doing this one more time by singing out together, with all of our voices kind of calling out together how awesome he is. And so I want to invite you to stand with us, and we're going to sing. But before we do, I'm just going to kind of speak a blessing over us here for just a minute. And so God, may you be true to every promise you've ever made, and may every single one of us listening or watching trust deeply in that. May we bring all of this to all of this and trust that no one loves us more than you and no one is more capable than you. May our weeks be full of saying how great you are, because you're the best. In Jesus' name.